Okay, hello. Let me get this all.
Okay, hello.
All right, let's see. Just need to make sure everything's set here. Okay, so we have now, we have 23 persons watching right now. I just need to do a sound check. Can somebody comment, make sure that you can hear me?
I just need to do a sound check. Can somebody comment, make sure that you can hear me? I just need to do a sound check. Can somebody comment, make sure that you can hear me? I just need to do a sound check. Can somebody comment?
Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. How's that? Is that feedback gone? I think that should, yes, great. Thanks. Good, great. Okay, good. So here we go. So my name is Michio Kushi, and welcome to my uh, interview today with Dr. George Yu. Um, so first, for those who don't know me, my name is Michio Kushi, and you can find out more about this and other interviews that I've done through my website at fia.substack.com. That's a newsletter and website. My parents are Michio and Aveline Kushi, who are the renowned leaders of their time of the Macrobiotic movement. And I spent most of my professional life working for them and helping them in many ways, including helping many cancer patients and persons with other health issues recover and get better. Now, also, however, my parents passed away due to complications with cancer. My father wrote this book, The Cancer Prevention Diet, and in my capacity uh, at the Kushi Institute, I work with many cancer patients, helping them change their diets and get better. Now, so there's a I recently did interviews with my brother Norio, um, who had been diagnosed with cancer, and I recommended that he follow the protocols of Dr. George Yu. Now, Dr. George Yu, I met in 1999 while I was the director of the Kushi Institute. Um, and we were hosting many cancer patients every week at our Way to Health program. And George Yu was looking at alternative healing uh, uh, places that he was interested in studying, and came across our Kushi Institute. You know, he had visited many other places and then came across ours, and he saw that we were very much involved with the developing procedures for helping cancer patients, and which included a research project that my other brother started uh, earlier on. It was a retrospective study of cancer patients. And George, you saw that we were involved in that and decided to help us. And that eventually led to the presentation of the Macrobiotic Best Case Series to the National Cancer Institute in 2002. And so I've known George since that time, and we've been very close. And he is now a retired professor of surgery from George Washington University, specializing in pelvic reconstruction and urological cancers. So he was there since 1981, but he retired just last year and is now focusing on his foundation, the ufoundation.org, be able to do that, and he'll talk about that more in depth. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in George. on stage and welcome him. Okay.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hello. Thanks. So, George, I want to really first acknowledge you for helping my brother Norio. I recommended that he see you when he was diagnosed with Merkel cell carcinoma, and he did in January of this year. And since then, I'm happy to say that his cancer is gone following your protocol, which included following a keto diet, which he considers very instrumental in helping him. Um, and yeah, and the last email my brother wrote me was he had rode a bicycle 17 miles, which was amazing, especially since he's still got a kind of a healing wound on the back of his knee, but he's really physically active and really done well. So I really want to thank you for that. And thank you also for your help in the past, working with the cancer study and everything else. I mean, I think you and I share. I want to say that you and I have an affinity in that we both like to question everything, and we both like to look at what really works and what find out and explore and discover things. And you're very pragmatic in that way, and have been this whole time that I've known you. So thanks again, and thanks also. You also were helpful when my father was diagnosed with colon cancer. You helped him too during that time. So. Now, today's presentation is George has prepared about 39 slides. We may go through all of them, we may go through some of them, but we're going to go through them. He'll explain his whole approach to cancer, and then we'll open it up to questions. So now we've allotted at maximum, we've allotted 2 hours for this. And maybe an hour and a half would be realistic. So we'll go through the slides, and then we'll open it up to questions. So feel free to comment and ask questions anytime. I will look through them when I can. I will also be asking questions myself as we begin. So I also want to just say a disclaimer. This is not medical advice. If you have a health condition, please consult the appropriate medical authority. Of course, Dr. Yu is a medical doctor, but this is all educational for you to learn and then take back to your doctors if you need to see a doctor. So. So with that, let's begin. Okay,
Okay.
take it away, George.
So,
Thanks.
it's been 20 years since the Best Case series. And, the reason why I wanted to do this with Theo was because out of respect for Michio, who was a pioneer, Larry, who accumulated over 300 cases, and most of all, I would give credit to Thea for being truthful and courageous to acknowledge the fact that perhaps the macrobiotic formula is not the only way to do things. And there's a lot of new things that we have to consider. And that's what I did. I don't know everything, and I'm not the most published person in the world. I'm not a famous pioneer in cancer research. But one of the things that I've had a lot of experiences is in trench work, from missionary work to institutional work to private practice, even to Alaska, where I just found out that they have the highest rate of colon cancer in the world, 100 per 100,000. It's something that you would not have guessed, nor I, except the higher ups invited me to spend 10 days with them. And the first 3 days, I already found 3 colon cancers right away. So, what I'm saying
Right.
is that there's a lot of things that we don't understand, and perfect lectures don't always cut it.
Yeah.
Truth
Now
is easy to
you
find.
mentioned you mentioned that in Alaska, and you mentioned a place in Africa where the colon cancer rate is
Well,
uh,
it's non-existent. I work with Steve O'Keefe at Pittsburgh, and we both have had experiences in Africa, and the incidence is none. I would say it's maybe 4 out of 100,000. So I never
wow.
saw it. I saw typhoid fever with perforation of the bowel as a surgeon, but I never saw polyps and I never saw diverticulosis and never saw colon cancer. In the United States, it's more like 40 per 100,000.
Hmm.
But when I went to the Yupik tribe, who I like a lot, they're only about 30 miles from Russia. I realized that there's something not right and it's not well known. And
Yeah.
Steve and I both have a common interest in geographical medicine. And I learned it mainly because I didn't want to go to the NIH, and I became a missionary to work under Dr. Irvine, who was a great follower and colleague of Dr. Dennis Burkett, who was the father of Burkett's lymphoma.
Hmm.
And it's there that I found out two things. Number one, you don't need to use maximum tolerated dose for chemotherapy, and you still cure them. And secondly, he made the point that fiber was very important in the Western world. But in the Yupik tribe, it may not be so simple, you know. So what I'm saying is that I'm learning as well as you, but
Right.
I commend Thea for the courage to step out of this whole scenery and go to Alaska and chop wood for years, rethinking everything and being honest. And that's what we're all about. And our foundation is all about that. So we'll start with the first slide.
Okay. Here we go.
Okay, can you make that large?
That's as large as it goes.
Yeah. No, you could make it. I'm only seeing the small slide.
Oh, no.
Let's see. Okay, now I got it large.
Okay. Yeah.
Is your
Yeah.
large also so people can
Yes.
see?
Yes.
So yeah, this slide is basically a foundation that three philanthropists created for us in 2006. And our paradigm is that people like myself are just on the very bottom of that triangle. And the tipping point is a term used by Malcolm Gladwell in that you have to make it happen. The tipping point is all the people above the scientists and the doctors and the health experts, the journalism, what Thea's doing to make it a public awareness. So that's what I'm focusing on now that I just retired from George Washington and I'm free to talk about these things and really hopefully make a bigger impact. Okay, next slide. Go ahead. So this is 2,000 years old. This is nothing new. 病从口热. It's a Chinese statement that most of diseases starts from the mouth down, even though we depend on eating to survive. But it's also some of the bad effects that come with it. Next slide. And I tell you one thing. I didn't want to make this a formal lecture. I want it to be a sharing. So I'll skip some of the slides, but this is one thing that I remember from Michio. He said, you must read, read, and more read of other disciplines. And I've done that. And you must remember that all of us, including the most famous people, become a reductionist. They think of what they know and they think that's it. Even in microbiotics, I remember Michio told one of the people there, he was piling brown rice all over his plate. He says, you shouldn't eat that much. And I knew that the people in macrobiotics were on the skinny side, kind of slim and not chunky. And I knew that they were practicing some kind of calorie restriction. And he said one other thing when he developed colon cancer. He says, the reason I didn't have lymph nodes is because my total body burdens, even smoking, was not as much as the people in the regular world. Next slide. Next slide.
Sure.
So what he meant by body burdens is on the left, the input side. It could come from food. It can come from light. It can come from infections. All these things are body burdens. Think of yourself as having only $100 and you have to pay all these bills. And if you can't pay it right, you get infections, inflammations, and cancers. So these are what your body can clean up. On the right side is the cleaning. So you have to remember that there's only so much your body can do and has so much resources, not finite, infinite. And so you have to think about that. And that's one thing I learned from Michio is that you can't overburden yourself. Next slide. So this is a picture that I want to give credit to Chris Akbar. We spent so many hours. You see all the luggages there. These are all from data from 6 out of over 300 patients that we thought would be presentable and have excellent records. So she numbered every record from 1 to over 400 pages for each patient. And so we would make it the audit. The audit is what I did so that
Right.
the people saw it, could understand it very quickly without referring and say, maybe I can find out. The people on
I
the left are some of the survivors. And of course, Michio. And on the right is where the conference took place.
Yeah, I just want to mention Chris Akbar was my father's personal secretary at the time, and she had also cured herself of breast cancer at that time, and was part of the study herself. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the 300 cases that my brother had picked out was from a pool of maybe 5,000 cases that had gone through the Kushi Institute and had consultations with my father and some of the counselors, and 300 of them were called because they had documented evidence of uh, being diagnosed with cancer and then having been documented as having been in remission. And then Dr. Yu, had chosen 6 out of those because that we didn't need to get the
Well,
medical.
I had to interview all of them. I had to make
Yeah,
sure they're
yeah,
still alive, and I had
yeah.
to make sure that I knew the surgeons. One of the cases was a melanoma, and one of the surgeons who operated on the patient was a colleague of mine. He told me what he did. He actually resected 23 inches of her small bowel from melanoma, and he said I
Right.
couldn't do anything more. There was tumor all over the place, and I said I closed it up. I gave her one choice, and she refused, and she went home and cured herself.
Yeah, and then that was 20 years later.
Mhm.
They met again.
All right, so let's go on to the
Yeah,
next slide.
yeah,
So, one of the things I learned giving so many lectures in the, over 20 years, I realized that you can write a beautiful deductive thinking that's very convincing, but doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's reality. So my education comes from the trench work, from different sources after I left my formal training at the Brigham. And it's a reflection of what I think that I could share with you. It's not all accepted, but experience has a lot of truth in it. Next slide. So truth comes in many forms. It usually comes in the beginning as an unknown to professionals. Somebody senses something's wrong, can't explain it. And then it gets to the next level where the professionals start noticing it, but they have to publish it, they have to write case reports, and then all of a sudden, after 10 or 20 years, it becomes a truth that everybody accepts after all the studies have been done. So it takes a long time. So, what I'm saying is that a lot of times truth doesn't come easily, but you know it when you see it. Experience
Right.
is everything. Next slide. So my approach is something that I think I agree with Deng Xiaoping, who basically modernized China. He said, white cat, black cat, if it can catch mice, it's a good cat. So I'm not stuck on having only double blind studies because penicillin was not a double blind study. So the Chinese term is 白猫黑猫可以抓老鼠是好猫. So this is
Mm.
his approach to uh, the reality of life. And I take it the same way. Same.
Okay.
Next slide. So, what I say is science. I don't mean a discipline. It has to be reproducible. You have to be able to reproduce it over and over, replicate it with the same conditions. And that's science. It could be in cooking, it could be in color, it can be ceramics, it can be in farming, and there are many ways to do it. But I just tell you that penicillin was not a double blind study. Next
Mm-hmm.
slide. So when it boils down to when I audited many institutions, and I looked at all their cases, and it's about the same. It's about 40% success rate, about a third non-compliance, and the other third we never figured out what it was, even though they did practice it. So calorie restriction means cutting back on food. We know the science is over 100 years old, and nobody will ever deny it. No professionals will ever deny it. And the person who did the most work was Roy Wolford in the center page. And his disciples, Spindler, Longo. This came out of Biosphere 2, cost $150 million and more by the Bass brothers. And on the left, you could see Spindler, who says that even 2 weeks of cutting back the calories that you eat will change about 15,000 gene expressions. It's amazing. And when I
Mm.
first read this, I said, wow. And the
Huh.
human experiment was to the right.
Mm.
And you
Okay.
see on the bottom what he looks like when he was eating everything. And then when he went to calorie restriction, he looked skinny, just like
Right.
many of the macrobiotics people, but they have a shirt on.
Uh-huh.
But if you don't do that, you're not really practicing a form of calorie restriction. And this has been shown from worms all the way to mammals. And he was the first one to show it in humans that all the parameters of disease goes away, just about
Mm-hmm.
everything in 2 years' time. Next
Mm.
slide. So basically, the concept is simple. If you practice calorie restriction, and this is 100 years old, you will delay disease and you will live longer. Okay. The people who ate a lot died earlier. This is well known. The only thing that professionals always say is you can't do it, you can't accomplish it. Okay.
Mm.
Next slide.
Right.
So when I look at everything, this is a very important slide that you should take a picture of. And it's by Mary Linder. And you see the blue line where the sugar drops by calorie restriction. Immediately, you see the green line of fatty acids coming out.
Mm.
So it's a substitute fuel. Your body
Mm.
will adapt. That's why you have fat. Fat
Mm.
is a lightweight energy, much more than bone, muscle, or joints. And you see the red line is called beta hydroxybutyrate. This is the most important end product of free fatty acids. And that's
Mm.
what ketones are. And that's what
Mm.
basically ketosis is. When you cut back on the calories, you immediately go into that. So that's why you're not chunky and chubby. All right.
Mm.
So this is already practiced by Michio, but the people who practice it sometimes ate a little too much. Next
Mm-hmm.
slide. So it isn't like Michio did something wrong. He did it right, except it could be refined better. And one of the
Okay.
things that we found is that visceral defatting at the same time as cancer regression. Now, there's a symbol up there, your newsletter podcast, that's blocking some of the slides, Fia.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
remember that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you could see one case in which, if you look at the abdomen cross sectional, you see dark spots next to the white spots on the 2002 picture. And 2005, it becomes less. And then at the very end, 2008, there's none. It's all colon that's dark. You see that?
Uh-huh.
So what they've done is at the same time that the cancer goes away, the visceral fat is gone. It hasn't been gone. It just shrank. Fat cells do not go away. You're born with
Uh-huh.
it,
Right.
but they shrink and all the toxic material is gone and everything is gone that is probably unknowingly affecting you. So we
Right.
call this visceral defatting at the same time as calorie. This is a very important slide because once you understand this, you understand what calorie restriction does. Next
Hmm.
slide.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Just yeah. Just want to mention that these are X-rays of people who were in the macrobiotic best case study. Uh-huh.
Right. Right.
Okay.
So, just to show you, this is not from 2002. This is from 2022. By calorie restriction of 14%, they have shown that the thymus gland, which is an immune gland, okay? As soon as you're born, it starts regressing. Instead of
Okay.
regressing 2 years of calorie restriction in humans, it grew. You see that on the right?
Yeah.
So, this is a beautiful illustration of how calorie restriction works. So, the question you have is why did it not work in certain people? Next slide.
Hmm.
So, I knew that even then, Bob, who was a runner, even when I visited the Kushi, he kept saying he fractured his bones all the time eating strict macrobiotic. And when he added oils, it got better. So I knew already there was something wrong, but I didn't know what. Okay. But even at that time, there was something missing. Next
Hmm.
slide. So when I boiled down Lily, Aveline, Akbar, Michio, and others who failed, one of the things that stood up in my mind is the salmon story. The salmon is one of the fish that swims uphill under tremendous adrenal stress and dysfunction until they have none. And in the center slide, you see the two little adrenal glands, which is the lifeline of survival. If you don't have these adrenal glands, you die. And as this becomes decayed and injured, the whole concept of calorie restriction benefits are gone. So I let you just think about that. A good book is The End of Stress as We Know It by Bruce McEwen at the Rockefeller Institute, who really understood this. And I'll show you the next slide that happens is when we do calorie restriction in animal studies, as soon as we take the adrenal gland out, which is the bottom line, okay, uh, I'm sorry, it's the top lines, the cancer
Okay.
grows.
Right. Hmm.
So, what I'm saying is that you can negate the whole effect by adrenal dysfunction, whether it's overuse to exhaustion, or the common way we look at modern stress is so people always say stress, but they're not saying adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is your high charge sympathetic function, and it's for fight or run, fight or flight, we call it. And Walter Cannon was the pioneer of it. but it's a very important concept that very few people touch on. So I think that one of the factors of all the people who fail is something called way too much adrenal dysfunction. Next slide. So this slide, I think it needs to go up a little bit. Yeah, that's
Uh,
good. That's good. So
okay.
what I'm saying is that when you have adrenal stress, even at rest, if you don't sleep, your adrenal gland fires up. And when the adrenal gland fires up, the cortisol in your blood goes up because you're either going to run or fight, right? Your epinephrine goes up and your sugar immediately goes up high, very high. And another thing that happens with this process is that you form a lot more blood clotting factors. Because if you get bitten by a lion, you got to stop bleeding, right? So, this is an adaptive adrenal stress that's meant for running away from a vicious animal. But in real life, in today's life, our stress adrenal fatigue is could be your friend next to you or a colleague next to you who you don't like, but you have to say hello.
Right.
So all this blood sugar going up, and I'll show you the next slide, which is
Hmm.
very, very important. And I'll tell you this, just look at this slide, but I just want to touch on a few things. At the time in 2002, we just didn't have all these new concepts being accepted. The first one that's most important is the PET scan. The PET fused with the CAT scan. PET tells you what the cancer is eating. CAT shows you structure. We weren't using PET as much at that time. The second thing is that we didn't understand medium chain fatty acids in coconut oil, uh, that it can be a fuel but doesn't require insulin. We didn't understand that beta hydroxybutyrate is the end product of ketosis. And by eating less, you already go into it. Now we can increase it. That's why we're so big on medium chain fatty acids like coconut. We didn't have blocking agents like dichloroacetate, 3-bromopyruvate, and enhancing metabolism. And we didn't know much about tumor angiogenesis, which was coined by one of my mentors, Judith Folkman. And so we didn't look at cancer in the more sophisticated, deeper way. And we always thought of maximum tolerated doses instead of low dose, which is very important that I told you I learned from Dennis Burkett and Judith Folkman. And we didn't know a lot about phosphatidylcholine, which is basically cell membrane. If you destroy cell membrane, the cell immediately dies. You could take away the nucleus and it'll live for another 3 weeks.
Hmm.
We didn't know
Interesting.
anything about the bacteria in your body.
Hmm.
We didn't really understand sex hormones because at that time we were just beginning to find out some bad effects of synthetic hormones.
Hmm.
And we didn't know how to clean yourself out except when we did the 9/11 experience using niacin and heat. We could actually get chemotherapy out.
Hmm.
So we didn't know a lot of things. And the last thing we didn't know is what the French Dr. Bigot says, if you decrease the dose of anything, you can decrease the side effects. And I'll get into that later.
Hmm.
Next slide.
Okay.
So this is a news letter from the Johns Hopkins magazine for medicine. And I wrote to them and I said, the article explains in a wonderful detail the landmark discovery of high metabolic uptake of sugar in 90% of cancers. Why is this so important? Because we are a world of objective measurements. We want to repeat it, reproduce it. To talk about it is what we call oftentimes anecdotal, though it has a lot of value. So what we
Mm-hmm.
did was the biggest discovery was to use something called fluorodeoxyglucose, which is a fake sugar, an analog, we call it. And it goes into the body, and the cancer cell, wanting to eat a lot of sugar, will take that up by mistake. And so you'll see the cancer lighting up right away. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a major breakthrough in the advances of nutrition because we realize that it's the sugar that the cancer has to eat. And if it doesn't have sugar, then it goes after a thing called glutamine amino acid. Next slide. So make it really simple. We believe, and that's my group, my foundation, and a lot of people believe that it is not the nucleus of a cancer cell that propagates it and starts cancer. It's the mitochondria. And mitochondria looks like little cigar shaped things, which produces all the energy. If you didn't have it, you're dead. And the cancer cell to your right, you could see that their mitochondria is abnormal. We feel that cancer is a normal cell that senses that there's less and less oxygen and finds a way to survive without oxygen, with less oxygen. So you could see the detail 60% glycolysis, meaning pure sugar, and 40% is oxidative phosphorylation. So we already know that why nutrition is so important. And these mitochondria were once bacteria because they look like bacteria. They have a DNA, and each cell can have two all the way to 5,000. We only have one nucleus. And the
Right.
next slide really puts the cap on our thinking. Next slide. And this was done by good work by William Schaefer. And I say this so importantly is because it's the information that's published that makes you understand so people can share that information. And here's the busy diagram, normal cell and a cancer cell. So what do? They moved the cancer nucleus to a normal cell, and they moved a normal cell nucleus to a cancer cell. What happened? The second generation shows that it's not the nucleus, but something outside of the nucleus that causes that next generation of cancer cells. You see that? On the right, they became cancer cells, even though the nucleus was normal. This is a
Right.
classic study, and all the references are below that.
Yeah.
But this
That's
made
fascinating.
people understand ah, it's not the nucleus, and people are still talking about the nucleus. They have
Right.
interactions, but just remember you have about 5,000 mitochondria in each cell, and they have their own
Uh-huh.
nucleus and DNA,
Mm,
and they replicate,
mm,
and it's
mm,
inherited from your mother,
mm.
came from a bacteria. So, this is William Schaefer's greatest contribution to medicine.
Right.
Next slide. So this is a busy slide that I put in from the U Foundation. But I said, what did we learn from all these audits? We learned a couple of things. The CAT scan, let me just go right to the second one. The CAT scans shows tumor shrinkage within 3 to 6 months. And
Mm-hmm.
while we see the visceral defatting that I showed you. Second thing is everybody has to lose about 10% of their body weight.
Mm.
Next thing is their sugar goes between 70 and 85. And now we have monitors, which we call Free Libra 3, and you put it on a patch on your skin, and you will check your blood sugar every second for 2 weeks
Mm.
automatically. We
Amazing.
also know that the insulin level drops, and the
Mm.
hemoglobin A1C, which is a way to check a sugar tail on your red blood cells, goes down to 5. Okay,
Mm.
so we know all these things already that has made it possible for us to understand. And the next piece is that F18F fluorodeoxyglucose is the is the contrast that we use to check how active the cancer is eating sugars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So these are
Mm-hmm.
all there, and you have to read to understand it. Go
Right.
ahead, next slide. So these are my two great teachers, George Cahill and
Mm-hmm.
Richard Veach. And Richard Veach just died 3 years ago. And beta hydroxybutyrate is the end product of all ketogenic diet. So people who are practicing calorie restriction were already in ketosis, but we can accentuate that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why is why is beta hydroxybutyrate so powerful? Because it doesn't require insulin, and it's a fuel that the brain and the heart loves, muscles love.
Mm-hmm.
You see that the arrows there, the two arrows
Yep.
on the left and on the right. These are all beta hydroxybutyrate, and it feeds the body well. In fact, if you starve a person and just give them beta hydroxybutyrate, they can live for 2 weeks. That study
Right.
was done. So now we have all this other information that we didn't know then. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an important slide for you to memorize, that when you take medium chain fatty acid, MCFA, carbon 6, 8, 10, 12, it doesn't include fish oil or seafood. This goes into your stomach, into your small bowel, and goes into the liver and gets converted right away to ketones. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what you hear about in the news all the time: ketones, ketones. And it goes right to your cell and makes ATP, which is your energy molecule, without sugar or insulin. So now you have a substitute fuel. And what George Cahill did was, is it possible to live without sugar? And that is a more advanced thinking in the science of nutrition. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, fasting is kind of a modern concept of people who live with way too much food in the refrigerator. And it was, popularized by Volta Longo. Basically, what fasting does, it puts you into a way in which you start using fat metabolism or ketone metabolism instead of
Mm-hmm.
sugar and glycogen. So when you
Mm-hmm.
sleep, let's say you go to bed around 7 p.m., you wake up the next morning. If you eat breakfast, you replenish the sugar and carbohydrates. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't and you exercise or go for a quick cold swim or not
Mm-hmm.
eat, if you wait till noon, you have depleted all the sugar and carbohydrates and glycogen from your liver. And now you're using all fat. Remember that
Mm-hmm.
diagram I showed you in the beginning? It's
Yeah.
using ketone. So now you
Mm-hmm.
got into the second reservoir of energy. And this
Mm-hmm.
is what we did as hunter gatherers. We starved and we ate and we starved. And the women had fat because they had to survive to reproduce. If they didn't
Right.
have that fat, they could not make ketones. So it's an
Yeah.
evolutionary adaptation to life
Mm-hmm.
without a refrigerator.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
next. So another concept that I like to present to you is, uh, I was privileged that Kumi-san from Japan and a couple of other people invited me to Japan to really look at misos, the miso production. And what is miso basically, in its raw form, is basically enzymes. And
Mm-hmm.
when I was when I met all the people, I contacted all the people, and then I took a trip to Japan, looking at the mom and pop miso makers all the way to the giant Amano, which is was a pharmaceutical company which makes over 700 enzymes worldwide and is the
Wow.
leader. Okay, so what does that do? A concept that I like to show you on the next slide is something that was popularized by Nicholas Gonzalez and Pamela Goodwin under the Kelly protocol for enzyme therapy. And I should point out that for Norio, what we did was we finally convinced him that he has to stop eating noodles. Lisa, one who orchestrated that, and started giving him oils like medium chain fatty acids.
Okay.
So that was the first, he was reluctant about that
Uh-huh.
until he did not do well on just immunotherapy.
Mm.
And then she was able to convince him to work together and switch to not necessarily animal food, but to
Uh-huh.
oil. Now
Uh-huh.
he's eating animal food, but Lisa is the one who told me she's giving him a lot of medium chain fatty acids as a
And
fuel.
that's in the form of coconut oil. Huh?
Coconut oil is the simplest way to do it. If you want to get beta hydroxybutyrate, it's also available. By the way, Tour de France last year, everybody used beta hydroxybutyrate.
Oh,
So it
okay.
isn't like it's new. It's very, very powerful as an energy source.
Mm.
The difference between what Pamela and Nicholas used was animal enzymes. And you could see on your right, plant enzymes are basically from first the koji, which has bacteria in it, the
Mhm.
second stage in which they use Aspergillus oryzea, a fungus, and they can make all the plant enzymes that way. And the beauty of that is that they can work with pH of 2 all the way to 8 to 10.
Mm.
Whereas our own body, mammalian enzymes, can only work at a pH of 8. See
Uh-huh.
that?
Yes.
What they use is high pH, high dose, meaning
Mm-hmm.
they would take over 40 to 70 enzymes a day when they're not eating. So it goes
Mm.
systemically. And
Mm.
I have experience with that, and I know that works. And so this is a form of immunotherapy as we now know it, because at that time they didn't know it. But Dr. Kelly cured himself of pancreatic cancer this way.
Mm.
Okay, so
Mm.
I introduced that to Norio also. And what's surprisingly great, and I don't know all the answers, but I
Right.
know what other people practice. And when one doesn't work, you better use the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And I always make the analogy that you should think of fighting a war.
Mm.
You don't send the troops in right away. You first cut off their water supply against the
Mm.
cancer. Then you cut off their food supply.
Mm-hmm.
Then you give them a disease. And then
Mm.
lastly, you might send in the troops in an unexpected time. And in Russia, how did they beat Napoleon? They fought in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon's soldiers didn't have the right shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
in a way, cancer is not a reductionist, simple, I found the truth. It's a
Uh-huh.
whole conglomeration of things. And our foundation belief from our background with Micho is that the PET scan shows you it's eating sugar. So why not attack it from that side also?
Right.
Next slide. This is a busy slide, but I'll just let you focus on the left one. How does the enzymes work? So you see the green enzyme. How enzymes work is they change their shape. When they change their shape, they attach the pink particle macroglobulin, and they attach the yellow one, which is transforming growth factor. And the transforming growth factor has a nasty effect when it gets too high. It blocks your own immune system from working. You see that on the top
Mm-hmm.
arrow?
Uh,
Now, when
mm-hmm.
you put the enzyme all together with it, it unblocks it. So
Mm.
now this complex, when you're not eating, can attack the tumor cells.
Mm-hmm.
You see that? Okay. There's a lot of other things next to it. And this on the slide B explains to you all the things that we have developed in modern times. And one of the biggest is the red lymphocytes, which we call the PD-1 checkpoint inhibitors. Okay. So what does the enzymes do? In this therapy, the enzymes can also take care of small particles of new mutations on the lymphatic tissues that are blocked. See?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not building another antibody, but or building a protease, but it can take care of all funny looking foreign mutation proteins. There's a lot more on this slide, but I will go on. Okay. Next.
Okay.
So this has changed cancer therapy forever. Uh, Tasuku Hanju in 1992 won the Nobel Prize for the PD-1 checkpoint inhibitor Opdivo, targeting immune system and not the cancer cell. This is the major breakthrough in medicine, and
Mm-hmm.
this has changed the world. So what you think of as chemotherapy is all the cytotoxic agents like doxorubicin and
Mm-hmm.
Taxol, but they're not using that anymore. They're using
Uh-huh.
combinations. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why you have to read. You have to read to stay in touch. And you know, Mr. Honjo won the Nobel Prize, and he's the most respected person in the world today. Okay, in chemotherapy. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we also know is that I alluded to this was that when I was in Africa working with Dennis Burkhead's concept with Dr. Irvine, he said, we're not going to use maximum tolerated dose. You see that? Maximum tolerated dose. We're going to use low dose, constant dosing of methotrexate against Burkhead's lymphoma, and it still kills the cells. So you could
Mm-hmm.
see below this diagram 10 to the minus 12 power, 10 to the minus 11. That's less than 1 per billion of the chemotherapy, and it still kills the cells.
Mm-hmm.
You see that? And
Yeah.
this is what Judith Folkman talked about. You can work around the cancer environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is major. But
Yeah.
there's an economic issue on that. Next slide. Another thing that's new, and this is where I, respectfully disagree with a lot of people who only use vegetables. They have to use egg yolk. You see that orange egg yolk? It
Uh-huh.
has huge amounts of what we call phosphatidylcholine. It is cell membrane of all cells. It lets things in and out. It's the governor of what goes into your body and comes out. And we believe this is very important because the cancer cell, as you could see on your left, changes its shape. And on the right, you can actually redifferentiate cells to make it normal. Now, not everybody's going to agree with me, but it's okay. You know, it's my concept that you have to have good phosphatidylcholine and good phenylbutyrate to redifferentiate cells. Why is trans fatty acid so bad?
Mm-hmm.
Because it gets stuck in the cell membrane. You
Mm-hmm.
heard of Crisco oil.
Right.
Yeah, all these, what happens, they get incorporated right into the cell membrane.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's in every piece,
Right.
inside the
Right.
cell, outside the cell, and that's what makes the cell viable. If you tear
Right.
the cell membrane, the cell immediately dies. If you take the
Mm-hmm.
nucleus out, it'll still survive for a while.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is something. It's in mother's milk. It's in egg yolk, and this is where you have to grow and grow further from what Michio may have told you and learn on your own. That's what he wanted you to do. He
Hmm.
wanted you to disagree with him.
Right.
Next slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned Crisco oil, that when you went to Alaska and visited the Yupik people, you went to the local grocery store, and it was just full of Crisco oil. And I've seen
Right.
that too in the most remote places, like in
Right.
Nome. You go into the grocery store and they've got all this, like, I guess government subsidized food, which is all Crisco oil
I'm
and
not
all these
even
other.
sure it's all government subsidized. I think they
Oh
sell
yeah,
it to you. Yes.
yeah.
And
Okay.
I talked to the person at the market and says, "Well, they make a wonderful dessert with it." And so I said, "How about using a whipping cream? Would you like
Uh-huh.
that?" She says, "Oh, we love whipping cream, but it's
Hmm.
bad for your health, isn't it?" No, it's the best for your health.
Hmm.
So don't be afraid of buttermilk. It's not the milk, it's the butter that's so important above that. It's the stuff that floats on top because that goes through metabolic complete oxidation so you get the energy.
Right.
Okay. So I showed this slide again, the adrenal gland, and I believe that that may have a big factor in why people like Chris Akbar had a problem because she
Yeah.
had another cancer after that.
Right.
She was under so much adrenal stress and decay that all the calorie restriction food that she would have benefited from may not have been working. And
Hmm.
I recommend Bruce McEwen on the right. It's a great book. And I show you the salmon that I was catching in Alaska. And these salmon were just going upstream to
Uh-huh.
spawn. And by the
Right.
time he got up there, he would be one third that size.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is something well known. And
Hmm.
we live with adrenal fatigue every day in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I I can imagine that most people live under stress or some
Yeah,
kind of
some kind of
uh
stress. And the funny thing is, people say stress, but they don't say adrenal. They
right,
don't
right.
talk about
Adrenal,
adrenal gland.
right.
You see.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
let me just show you the next slide, which is very important. Again, it shows you that it makes things clot. Also,
Hmm.
it makes the sugar go way up high, whether you want to or not, because
Hmm.
it's an evolutionary response,
Hmm.
and it triggers the sympathetic nervous system. Okay,
Hmm.
so you have reversed everything you wanted because you're so intellectually fixed on getting the work done
Right.
and eating the way you're supposed to.
Right.
Okay, so life is about a yin and the yang, and you can't have all yin and you can't have all yang.
Right.
It's a balance. So, next slide. This
Yeah.
is the most important modern life concept that you must learn to use. And Stephen Porges probably should win the Nobel Prize. And he
Hmm.
did something on infant babies and study RSA, respiratory sinus arrhythmia. When you inhale, you stimulate the sympathetic chain and your heart rate goes up. When you exhale, your parasympathetic works and it slows down the heart rate. And this is an inborn vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is one of the 12 cranial nerves that goes from the brain all the way down to your anus. It
Hmm.
supplies all the organs and touches it. What's so special about the vagus nerve in the mammal. See, on the left, there's two branches of the vagus nerve. One is myelinated and one is not. The primitive animals, like reptiles, are unmyelinated. They respond right away. The myelinated has the ability, with a big brain, to negotiate the sympathetic explosion. It tells the sympathetic to take over. You see, even breathing, just like in yoga, just like a lot of things, just like sports in which you're using the myelinated portion to deal with life in general, because everybody is under sympathetic stress. Okay. So, this is something you can take into consideration. And I always say sports is easy because you don't have to think too much and you can deplete some of that nervous energy that you don't know what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And I think this is a big factor in what we learn from the Kushi history.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide.
Right. So you're saying just by breathing, you can
That's
reduce the adrenal effects,
right.
the
It's
cortisol
the
effects.
exhalation. It's not the
Uh-huh.
inhalation,
Right.
but it's a vagus nerve that, let's go back one more time. Let's
Okay.
go back to the other slide. So I
Right.
should say that it's a normal to have RSA. If a
Uh-huh.
child comes out in a newborn who's only has one heart rate, you know they have problems in the future. They will have problems. So
Mm-hmm.
this is the vagus nerve in its active form. And if you cannot adapt, slow down your heart or increase it, you will have trouble in adjusting to a modern world.
Mm-hmm.
So what he said is, we already know who's going to have problems.
Mm.
Okay,
Okay.
next slide. Okay. So one of the things that we also learned, I just bring this up, is that on the left you see man getting old, and the hormones have a lot to do with how you're going to age and what kind of disease you. In the zone of prostate change, you see that testosterone goes down, the female hormone goes up, and that's when the prostate cancers occur. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's well known. And you have to
Right.
read.
Right.
In the female, on the right hand side, you see them getting old.
Mm-hmm.
And at age 20, the progesterone and the estradiol level is proportionally quite different. One is 20,000 and the other one's around 300 to 500. When they
Mm-hmm.
reach 60s, the progesterone goes down more radically than the estradiol estrogen. And I
Mm-hmm.
always say estradiol because that's human identical. And that's when you get breast cancer. So we know how to avoid breast cancer, just even that. But it's
Mm-hmm.
not published well enough. It's not talked about well enough. See, so
Mm-hmm.
we already know that.
Mm-hmm.
Alzheimer's is going to be the biggest epidemic coming up and occurs more in women than men.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that time, at that perimenopause, menopause time, where the brain is unable to use sugar as its fuel. Just the opposite of cancer. Cancer
Mm-hmm.
uses sugar, and Alzheimer's, we could see from PET scan that they can no longer use sugar. So you have to use beta hydroxybutyrate to counteract it.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide. This is our current way of approaching everything. It's too busy to explain, but you could see that we use on the left the calorie restricted nutritional approach as one piece of the many puzzles that you have to address. It's like fighting a war. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot just use one method. Okay, on the
Mm-hmm.
right, we have all the other things that we use. And so that's how we explain it to people, that you have to approach it from a multi focus group. Okay, next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is another thing that's new. I went to France to work with Dr. Begot, and he showed me that when you use micro nano doses, meaning, you know, 10 to the minus 3 all the way to 10 to the minus 12 power of a fraction of that chemical, you will negate the effect. So I saw a lot of patients who had full doses and didn't lose any hair. They didn't get infected. They didn't develop anemia. So I said, this is something worthwhile looking at. And it's something
Mm-hmm.
that's not shown in the United States, but it's in English, so you can read about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we get rid of the side effects of the traditional therapy. And of course, in immunotherapy, we can decrease the doses. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the greatest survivors of the immunotherapy that was pioneered by Dr. Hanjo was President Carter, who had melanoma, and he used the first immunotherapy, the second immunotherapy, Keytruda, and his melanoma went away. See? So you
Mm-hmm.
can see that things are evolving, but it's up to you to learn and don't be too stubborn about sticking with your thinking and say,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should try other things. And that's what you should go away with. You should look at everything. Okay. Next slide.
Okay.
So, one of the things that Alex Jack asked me to do was that, hey, George, can you on your lectures encourage people to eat some raw food? Because he understood it. And of course, I did a lot of Hippocrates and Wigmore and many other calorie restricted nutritional approach to chronic disease. And the two things that I would share with you is number one, Professor Talalay at Johns Hopkins was the greatest advocate for broccoli sprouts. Okay, highest nutrition with the least calories, and it worked marvelously. So you should take that into consideration. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing is wheatgrass juice makes you not hungry. If you take a wheatgrass sprouted juice, put a little lemon in it because it's too sweet sometimes, you will not be hungry. It
Mm-hmm.
works just like the new drug semaglutide, like Welgovi, Ozempic. It takes your appetite away. It basically gives you a gastric bypass without doing surgery. And I realized that right away when I went there. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing is sunflower sprouts. Sprouts are young, non toxic plants. And when you eat it, it has very few toxins. And in its raw form, not cooked, it saves all the nutrition if it's
Mm-hmm.
under 110 degrees. So we can all learn from each other. And I
Right.
try to push that, but some people get stuck.
Right. Right.
You have to be open for yourself because you're
Right.
fighting a war and you're trying to protect yourself, not
Right.
follow a, a protocol. Okay.
Great.
Let's-
Okay.
Is that it?
So I
Yeah.
think that's it. That's the last slide. Yeah.
So, I tried
Uh,
my best to give you as much as I could, sharing
uh-huh.
with you, but also acknowledging that I'm not completely right.
Right.
But Norio's case, when he switched to a ketogenic formulation of food, and you could eat meat, but the problem
Uh-huh.
is Atkins' diet made everybody constipated after a while. It gave them bad breath because they had all this food in their colon that were not digested. So you have to take enzymes with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's much better to use medium chain fatty acids, which is the real ketogenic diet. Okay.
Okay.
And the second thing was he started using protease enzymes. And, I also know he was using ivermectin, which has some other properties
Mm-hmm.
which may help with the cancers. but his lymph nodes subsided. His wound that was irradiated and had the Merkel's viral cancer, I believe,
Hmm.
was subsiding. And when we added his male hormones, because he didn't have any,
Mm.
uh, a lot of people with calorie restriction will have hypothyroidism on long term, low TSH, T3,
Mm.
T4, and they will lose all their testosterone generally.
Mm. Mm.
Okay, so female will lose their estradiol. So it isn't
Mm.
like one approach is the only way to protect yourself, but you have
Right.
to look.
Right.
So so in this experience with Norio, we can
Uh-huh.
all learn from what we didn't know. And I'm just introducing a few things, but
Right.
just remember, it's like fighting a war in
Right.
any chronic disease. It isn't one formula that's going to do it.
Right. Yes. Great.
Oh,
Okay, so I'm gonna open it up to the questions and see what if there are questions.
I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay, sure.
All right.
Uh, so feel free to ask your questions on the comments. I see them. Uh, uh, okay. We'll wait until he comes back. If you need to take a break.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, so we're just going to go right down the list of starting with the first question, which is from Leonard Jacobs. Do you think, Dr. Yu, that all cancers are related to nutrition or excesses?
No, no. As I
Uh,
showed you in my presentation, there's the mitochondria, and the mitochondria can be infected. It can be
right,
inflamed. It can be
right,
from nutrition, and
uh,
usually it's too much nutrition.
right, right.
It's one
Also
piece
from,
of the puzzle, but the PET scan really made it accepted by the whole world.
uh, meaning the positronic,
Uh, uh,
uh,
its PET scan means a positron emission tomography, which tells
right,
you what the food that the cancer is eating. It's not
yeah,
the structure.
right. So even so, the damage to the mitochondria could come from a number of different
That's
places.
right. It can come from
Uh-huh,
irradiation. So just remember,
uh-huh.
there's 5,000 mitochondria in each cell. Each
Right,
cell has
right.
its own DNA. The chances
Yes,
of mutation is very high.
right, right. Yes, and like you said, I think the thing that you said, which I thought was great, was that when the body has low oxidation, it's the cells adapt to that and
That's
become
right.
mutate.
Greg Samanza won the Nobel Prize a few years ago from Johns Hopkins, and he coined the term HIF, hypoxic inducing factor. If you
Uh-huh,
look at um, his work, he says cancer could be a normal cell, like a senile cell, that has very little function, that learned to adapt to low oxygenation and found a way to eat and survive.
uh-huh. So it's just a natural evolution of the
Could be.
given the conditions
That's
of the
right.
body, right?
That's
Okay,
how
good.
mitochondria came about when we had oxygenation in the air. It
Right.
decided that it would become part of our bodies.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay, so now the next question is why do you think the incidence of colon cancer is so high in Alaska? I think we touched upon that with the Crisco oil. Is that
That's one thing. By the way,
uh-huh,
they only eat fish.
right? Fish.
So
Right,
it isn't like you can blame it on one thing. It's
right.
a lot of things. And Steve and I are probably going to go back to the Yupik tribe, and maybe we can do something to
Uh-huh,
elucidate this, because colon cancer is very important. And
right,
Michio
right,
had it too.
right, right. So do you think it's maybe related to that fish eating?
Not
Possibly.
necessarily. It's the way
Okay.
it's prepared.
Okay.
So they
I
smoke it.
see.
Okay.
Right.
and
Yeah.
and also the question of fiber. So unless you're there, they say, well, they don't eat enough. When I went there, I went into the tundra by myself, and it's a foot deep of vegetables.
Right.
So it's there. So what I'm saying is, academic papers don't always do things properly unless you're in the trenches.
Right. Right. Okay. Uh, so another question from Leonard Jacobs is, who is advising cancer patients besides you using these insights? Are you, obviously
Oh, there
you
are many
both,
people.
yeah, yeah,
There's a great book written by Tom Seyfried called "Cancer is a Metabolic Disease." It's a
okay,
classic. It's sold billions, and it's
right,
worldwide. But what he's a great writer, and the
uh-huh,
whole concept of William Schaefer nuclear transfer shows you that it's from not from the nucleus; it's from other
right,
things.
right, mainly the mitochondria,
That's right. That's the
yeah,
beginning. It has an
right,
effect on the nucleus, but later on.
right, okay. Another question, how about natto and tempeh? The
Oh, okay.
fermented,
Natto is a fantastic. It's fantastic. Right
yeah,
now, as you may know, the COVID spike protein from a vaccine, because it's not a vaccine as we knew it. It's an mRNA, messenger RNA. It's a piece of the virus, and therefore it has the ability to move around. And one of the things that it produces is a protein. Okay,
mm-hmm,
and we call the spike protein. You can't get rid of it, and
mm-hmm,
it goes in. Sometimes it goes into your organs, like the heart. So
right,
we always use natto kinase at 2,000 FUs,
uh-huh,
and you can use bromelain also, which is from pineapple, and you could use papain from papaya. Those are all fantastic, fantastic stuff. And enzymes have a lot to do with changing a function just by changing its shape.
right, okay, great. Um, so then the last question is more of a philosophical question. Are we fighting cancer as an enemy, or is it a friend which helps us understand our own imbalances and find a more harmonious life? Uh,
Good question, because
uh,
I don't know all the answers, nor do
right,
the experts, nor the
right,
guys who write double-blind studies. But we know one thing: it does eat sugar. Okay,
okay,
then it eats glutamine as a
right,
second choice. But
uh-huh,
glutamine is necessary for the whole body.
right,
Okay, so it isn't. An evolution of us understanding that it may not be a disease; it's a process that's going on.
right,
And
right,
as I said, Alzheimer's is another process that's coming. We're going to see an epidemic of it, because we're already doing PET scans on so many people who are perfectly normal, but they forgot to turn the stove off.
mm. What
Dangerous.
do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean by that? They forgot to turn the
Well,
stove off.
the brain's not working. The brain
Oh,
is
okay,
no longer working. So
uh-huh,
we know this 10 years before you get the real memory loss. We could
wow,
check it right away.
yeah, wow. Okay, so perhaps we should do a whole nother episode on Alzheimer's. I think that might be helpful. Um, okay, let's move on. Uh, so then another question from Cynthia Vaughn. Why is the macrobiotic diet also able to remit cancers? It seems to be opposite of these insights, but I think you've answered that in terms of the calorie
That's
restriction.
right.
Uh,
There's a concept. It's 100 years old. Nobody will
uh,
contest it. They just
yeah,
said you can't do it. Okay.
that
And of course, what Michio caught was one of the macrobiotic people piling on the brown rice because he's hungry all the time.
right. Uh-huh.
See,
Yeah,
they were
and
overdoing it.
the other thing you mentioned was the miso, how beneficial that is.
It's an
Uh,
enzyme
yeah,
effect. Yeah. And
yes,
and as I said, the enzyme effect may be an immune effect.
yes,
If
uh-huh,
you do look at the science, it shows it that the
Yes.
protease enzyme when you're not eating
Hmm.
goes into the bloodstream and does that. There's a good book
Right.
out by the Kelly Protocol by Pamela, just came out last week, and
Right.
you can check on that.
Okay. The next question is how about children, cancers in children, like with leukemia?
Hmm.
Would this be helpful, this protocol or
Well, if
approach
you
be
do a
helpful?
PET scan, you know immediately.
Uh-huh.
You see,
That,
you could tell right away. Okay,
uh-huh.
and yes, the metronomic chemotherapy is another way of giving chemotherapy. Dr. Folkman said it works on the microenvironment of the cancers, so
Hmm.
you could get it with low dose constant if you look up YouTube metronomic chemotherapy. And you know what's so sad is there's a lot of, in some ways I agree with the COVID initiative in that there's a lot of censorship and putting away things that aren't acceptable, and so you can't
Uh-huh.
see it. So
Uh-huh.
metronomic chemotherapy was started for pediatrics. Why should a 50-pound person get the same dose as a 100-pound, 50-pound dose? So they said, well, we have to adjust it. And that's the beginning of metronomic low dose constant. So you're not giving a chance for the cancers to grow. When you give maximum tolerated doses, what happens? They get so sick, you have to stop for 6 weeks.
Right.
Whereas
Yeah.
when you use the low dose, micro nano doses, you not only alleviate
Uh-huh.
all the side effects, but it's constantly attacking it.
Hmm.
Both our foundation believes that we have to attack it from the nutritional metabolism, and you have to
Hmm.
talk about mitochondria. You can't
Hmm.
just be saying nutrition, not good
Right.
enough. You have to get deeper than that.
Right. Right. So then also like for children with leukemia, then stopping sugar obviously would be.
So, sure, and starch if they're PET
Uh,
scan positive. Not all
uh-huh.
of them are PET scan, but I would say 99% of leukemias are that way. They're
I
all
see.
PET scan positive. Yeah.
Right. Good. Good. Okay.
Okay.
Next, uh,
We
yeah.
have to stop soon.
Now was Michio on a calorie restricted diet or Ovalene?
Yes, they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah. Yeah. Except I do know that Michio's condition went down after Ovalene passed away because, uh, and what happened was she was kind of ensuring that there was home cooked meals at the house. But then after she passed away, Michio had a tendency to eat out a lot, especially on his travels. He was always eating out, which I think was not good for his health.
But
Anyways,
just
that's
remember
another.
the stress adrenal fatigue.
Yeah, that's
That's why I
right.
kept
That's the
wanting
other.
to point out, instead of just talking about food, you have to say,
Right.
how much stress are you going through when you're trying to be intellectually correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely he was very stressed. His lifestyle was very I
Adrenally exhausted.
yes, exactly. Okay, good. Here's a question. Is ghee beneficial? Clarified butter,
What is
ghee.
ghee? It's nothing but
Ghee,
filtered butter. Okay.
filtered butter.
And
Uh-huh.
butter is fat, it's not
Right.
milk. Milk is
Uh-huh.
casein. And so
Uh-huh.
fat is useful because most of the cancers cannot eat it, especially in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So when you use mitochondria oxidative phosphorylation, which we call Krebs cycle,
Uh-huh.
the cancers don't use that. They only use
Uh,
fermentation.
right. Right.
You have to know the science so you could speak and talk intelligently with each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Now, here's another question from Marion. If the adrenals are so important and sleep affects the adrenals, what do you recommend for getting a good night's sleep?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's obvious. Once a woman passes age 50, her likelihood of constant sleep is low because she has no more progesterone.
Mm,
Progesterone is a GABA receptor that tells your brain, shut up and go to bed.
mm, mm,
Not only that, progesterone has an antidepressive effect by the production by the liver of allopregnanolone. That's another area that we're focusing on, is not to be using Prozac, because Prozac makes allopregnanolone,
Mm,
which is the same thing as a byproduct of your natural progesterone. So sleep becomes critical for women, especially once they finish with the first part of life after babies.
mhm, right.
So that
Oh,
affects the adrenal gland big time.
right. Uh-huh. So I think we answered this one. Oops. Oh, hey, we can put these right up there. What do you
No,
think
no,
directly?
that's too big
Yeah,
a topic.
a question. Yeah. Okay.
But just remember what William Schaefer did,
Uh-huh. Which was
which was the nuclear transfer studies.
right. Okay. That
So
so it was
you know more than that. We made a cartoon in the U Foundation. So that every high school kid would understand it. We also have the Toot seminars, 100 hours in which you could get for nothing practically. We spent $500,000 making it digitized. So you could get all that from the ufoundation.org. That's our
okay.
public service.
Right. Okay. Next question is, can you clarify what one can do to avoid or at least treat Alzheimer's?
The most important thing is, as you women get it more than men, okay?
Uh-huh.
And you need to understand your hormone profile as you get older, because the hormones affect your brain tremendously. So you need to understand that the hormone profiles you can get from even independently with zrtlabs.com, and you can do finger sticks and you can get your whole profile and know how old you really are right away. Second thing is, I would urge you to use medium chain fatty acids, because that's an alternative fuel than sugar. That's it's already there. You could use
Mm-hmm.
butter, you could use oils, but oils is a very efficient energy source, including fat.
Mm. Okay. Next, are you familiar with the Mitochondria Manifesto by
Yeah,
Dr.
yeah.
R.D.?
So,
Uh-huh.
mitochondria is very big. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Everybody knows it. In science, we all know it. It's not the only thing, but
Right.
it's a very, very important thing, because without the mitochondria, you're dead. It
Uh-huh.
came as a bacteria because the mitochondria nucleus is round, just like bacteria.
Right.
And somewhere in evolution, when we started making oxygen in the air, the mitochondria became symbiotic to us. We became
Mm-hmm.
part of it, and the mitochondria gave up some of its functions in the nuclear part and became an energy source. So
Okay.
it's a long history by this gal named Margolis, and she talks about mitochondria, and it's in that book. But it's huge. But it's the first step that we believe is the cause of the change in the cellular function and survival.
So maybe even then the gut microbiome might be
Absolutely. Yeah,
important
yeah, very important.
in
As a matter of
promote.
fact, there's a
Uh-huh.
gal named Dr. Erdman at MIT who does all the work on microbiome, and she's published so much profound work. And she's the one who
Uh-huh.
said in Crohn's disease, we use fecal implant. And
Right.
she's one of the pioneers. Fantastic. Great.
Okay. Good. So now there are more sources of medium chain fatty acids other than
Right.
coconut.
There are many sources of it, but this is the easiest. In Sri
Uh-huh.
Lanka, not many people have heart disease. Okay,
Uh-huh.
because that's all they have is coconut oil. Medium chain fatty acid is a form of coconut oil that's a liquid. They select
Uh-huh.
out this carbon. So just remember, lauric acid is an antibiotic. Okay, we could kill viruses with it.
Hmm.
Okay. We could kill bacteria and fungus by breaking the chain, the membrane. Another one is called caprylic acid, carbon 8. These are all small chains, and anything that can make small chain fatty acids, because in palm oil, there's some that can make that. And you could use these oils as a fuel and put it into your food, and it's fantastic. It's the best thing going in your life, and you should learn and look at it. There's quite a few different ones, but I can't spend all the time going over. But you can look at it. But we have people. In fact, we use medium chain fatty acids to cure babies with epilepsy. This
Yeah.
is from the Charlie Foundation, well known. It's 100 years old. And when we give the medium chain fatty acids, the brain uses different fuel and the epilepsy stops. Can you imagine a mother watching her baby bite her own tongue off because of seizure? It's very hard. And this is one of the best therapies, yet nobody uses it anymore. We still have Charlie Foundation, and it's well known. Good stuff.
Right. Great. Okay. Next, how about genetics? What about genetics in cancer?
Oh, it's huge. But the genetics, when you say the word genetics, are you talking about what kind of? Are you talking about the CRISPR is the biggest event. They changed the nucleic acid, just the AC, thymidine, adenine, and guanine and cytosine. Is that level? It's huge, but you got to understand that we believe the first thing that happens is the mitochondrial DNA goes bad, and then the nuclear DNA, which is huge, goes bad. So they work with each other. Okay, the genetics from the DNA of mitochondria is only 15,000. Easy. That's why there's 23andMe. There's Ancestry.com. They can easily pull that apart. Okay.
Right.
But what I'm saying, the nuclear is much more complex, but there's a lot of nuclear that's not even used. But it starts as an environmental injury or an adaptation. Everybody old has less oxygen in it's not red blood cells, it's your oxygen tension. How much oxygen can your body take? It changes. So once it changes, evolution changes. Just like Weston Price said, when you give a cat soft food, their jaw shrinks. Okay, so evolution is occurring as you and I are living. Why is the COVID vaccine so different? Because it's taking a piece of the protein made by the virus, and it's called messenger RNA that makes the protein. And now you have a much more versatile genetic material and made into a vaccine. It's not attenuated virus anymore. So this is a big topic, big. You can read all about it. But we believe that the mitochondrial DNA has an effect. And in fact, another Japanese researcher showed that prostate cancer, mitochondria, has no genes anymore, no genetic circle anymore. And he just died, and he was at University of Alabama.
Okay. Next question is, what about psychological issues? And I think we kind of covered that in terms of the adrenal.
You got to remember the adrenal gland. What people don't talk about, they say, "Oh, I'm under stress." They don't say it's the adrenal gland. And the perfect analogy or the model is the salmon. They just deplete their adrenal gland as they swim upward to spawn. That's the classic analogy for adrenal exhaustion, fatigue, and death.
Okay. let's see now. Going down to the any questions? Let's see. Smoke fish. Um, uh,
I should say one
uh,
thing. My sickest patients are intellectuals. The brain is working one way and their adrenal gland says, nope, I'm not going to follow you.
right. Uh, all right. So, okay, here's a question. Are you suggesting we read that book or read books, or are you taking new clients?
Oh, yeah, you see, the problem is this. If you're just a lecturer,
Uh-huh,
you're no better than a bureaucrat in a health agency. You're not in the
uh-huh,
trenches. You don't see people. So if you don't
right,
see patients, you don't know what's going on. You can only
right.
read things. And so that separates you from the reality. I remember Janet Travell was John F. Kennedy's doctor, and she was my mentor. And
Mm-hmm,
asked her, I said, why did you write your textbook, which is the most sold textbook in the world,
mm-hmm,
at age 81? She said, I want to make sure that my clinical experience matched the publication.
mm-hmm.
So reading
Okay,
books doesn't always give you truth.
right.
And I learned that from 70 years of living, that
Right.
what they say in papers sounds great, but doesn't always mean it's true,
Uh-huh.
or it's true.
Okay. Right. Great. So I will put your
Yeah.
contact information at the end of this talk so that people interested in getting in touch with George Yu could do so. Next question.
I have
How
to
would
go
you?
soon because it's
Sure.
getting close.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think we're almost done. Yeah, I think we'll just do a couple more. Uh, how would you distinguish cancers that are fed by ketones versus glucose?
Mm. It's
Well,
very rare that, like prostate cancer in the beginning, localized, is not fed by sugar. But we also know one thing: once it becomes metastatic, it's always by sugar. So,
so
the
the answer.
mutation changes, and there are, uh, I don't know many cancers that are strictly fed by ketones, but most of them we haven't developed yet. But we have developed fluorodeoxyglucose, which is an analog or a fake sugar. So we
Uh-huh,
always tell people, if you use galactose or D-mannose, it's the cancers can't eat it. So
uh-huh,
it's a sweetener, but they can't
uh-huh,
eat it. You
uh-huh.
see, so it's
Okay.
a metabolic issue, and it's in the forefront. The glucose. My mentor Pete Peterson at Hopkins said the cancers will develop a mutation. It's up to
Right.
you to catch it before it gets out of control.
Right. Okay, let's see. Got it. We'll do a couple more. Uh, what is your experience with cancer patients who lose weight with reduced
Mm.
calorie
Yeah,
diet?
yeah, yeah.
Does the weight stabilize or and increase again?
Yeah. So whenever you go on a ketogenic diet, you will lose weight.
Uh,
Okay.
Yeah.
And weight is not from fat. Okay. But one of the things that's different, and it's published and it's in my website, U Foundation, is that cancer cachexia, when they're losing weight and they're going to die, their cortisol level is sky high. It's like it's ready to crash.
Mm,
Okay. Whereas when you lose weight and you feel good, but you don't look like a typical, say, American look on the chubby side, it's fine. Okay.
mhm,
But you can use that to stabilize it. Why is weight important? Because you don't want to lose organ, liver,
uh-huh,
heart. So we always give L, L shape, L amino acids to retain body structure. So you have to use an amino. People don't realize giving protein doesn't always work. Only proteins with the L amino acids can be used by the body. So we
Uh-huh.
always give them L amino acids. And that
Okay.
should be that's part of our approach when we put on a calorie restricted keto. We call it cronk, calorie
Mhm.
restricted optimal nutrition ketosis.
Okay. So I'm gonna select one more question down here, which there's still a few more, but because of time, we're running out. Well, two more. One is this one. Can adrenal glands be strengthened once they are weak? How?
Absolutely. That's where
Uh,
you have to read the book, The Polyvagal Syndrome. You want
uh,
the sympathetic chain of your nervous system to be controlled better by the vagus nerve, VAGUS.
uh,
And there are many ways to do it. But
that's where thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Go
this
ahead.
is very, very, very important. It's the modern day killer. You
Uh,
could have a friend who you absolutely hate, but you can't say it. You could have a
right.
boss sitting next to you saying nice words to you when you know he can't wait to fire you. That's adrenal stress,
Uh,
adrenal gland. Okay.
and
And
that's
this is
that's
a
where. Right.
phosphatidylserine helps a little bit, but you have to control that part of your life. And I think that's a weak point in, I think, in the macrobiotic Kushi system that they didn't address. Like I always tell the people in macro, exercise a little bit, go ski, do something to get that part of the system going.
Right.
It's not the answer, but it's a way to adjust to it.
Right. So like breathing, meditation, exercise,
Yeah, the
yoga,
exhalation, the
yeah,
slow
exhalation.
exhalation is clearly parasympathetic stimulation.
Right.
Okay,
And that
but
that will
there are many
all help.
others. There are
That'll
many
help
others.
the that'll help reduce the stress on the adrenal glands or the
And also,
right.
some people are so strict in their diet, they kill themselves. So I
Right.
always tell people you have to give your body a chance to say, no, I'm not happy, and do
Uh-huh.
something different and just, to recoup. Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Okay, so one last question here. I think as the carnivore diet meets only, are you recommending the carnivore diet to others besides Noria?
No, 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 no. It's not carnivore diet. It's fatty acid. So you have
Okay.
to remember Atkins diet is a carnivore diet. The problem is it's very hard to digest all that food once you pass the age of 40. So you have
Uh-huh.
to use enzymes. But the
Right.
carnivore diet does not use sugar or starch. It's correct. But it's much better to use a perfect medium chain fatty acid to help you. Now, you could still eat the meat, but what I'm saying is that we, and at least in America, eat way too much meat. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I believe the colon cancer has a lot to do with it. Okay.
Right. Okay. So I think we'll stop there.
Okay.
We've
Great.
got a couple. Uh, do you have any last words you'd like to say, Dr. Yu?
No, I think please just think of this as sharing of ideas, making you think broader and not be so strict in the way you approach things, and take what you see in the news as pieces of the puzzle, and it's all involved with all chronic disease. As I said, the
Right.
next one coming is Alzheimer's,
Right.
and be ready for it. And you have to protect yourself and get a PET scan if you think you're losing your memory. We have many ammunition. Look at the tooth conference. Dr. Veach, who passed away, was my patient, and he's the one with George Cahill who developed beta hydroxybutyrate. So it's all there, but you have to open up your mind and open up your scope so you're not just reading everything about one area. And that
Right.
helps you a lot. It does help.
Great.
Okay.
So I think there's an opportunity here for us to organize maybe another
Yeah.
one or even two more talks, like the.
So I'm
Uh,
going to have to go now, and I
okay,
appreciate it, and thank you. And I think we want to open this up so it's not again a lecture type. We want you to think
right, right.
about it. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm
Good.
going to leave now. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Yu.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, and let's do this again. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll leave you. I'll remove you. Bye. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to put up Dr. Yu's contact information here if you'd like to get a hold of him or find out more about him. His main website is this ufoundation.org. Then he has a secondary site called Totally You 2, which deals with, I think it was enzymes or something specific. His office is there in Maryland, and there's his phone number and email. So feel free to contact him, uh, uh, and as well. So I guess that's it. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. This um, uh, uh, this video will be on the YouTube and will be on the live section. I may do put it on my regular YouTube channel, but this will always be available for anybody to review. Plus, I will do a blog post, a post report on this interview and include all the slides. Dr. Yu said that he'd be fine with that. We would include all the slides that he presented for you to review, and that'll be in my blog post report, which should come in the next week sometime. So again, thanks again, and maybe we can do another interview with Dr. Yu on Alzheimer's, as well as he just briefly touched on it, but he has a lot of fascinating information about COVID as well. That would also might be a totally separate interview. Anyways, thanks again for everyone, and with that, one other thing I might do is I might host another interview with macrobiotic cancer survivors, people who had recovered from cancer through macrobiotics, some of the best case series. If you are one of those and are interested in joining in another live interview, I can host about 10 people, including myself, on an interview like this, and we can do kind of a roundtable where people share their experience and how they uh, how they were able to recover their cancer using macrobiotics. That might be interesting for people on a personal and anecdotal approach. Okay, so again, thanks for joining me this Sunday afternoon. It's already almost it's 1:48 where I am, 2:48 where if you're on the East Coast. Thanks again, and feel free to comment and subscribe to my website, and that's where all my post reports will be. So thanks again, and have a great Sunday. Bye.